When we read Devarim chapter 4, verse 39, we get something very interesting from the book of Deuteronomy. It says, "You shall know today and feel in your heart that God is the only power. In the heavens above and upon the earth below, there is nothing beside him." That's Devarim chapter 4, verse 39. Let me repeat it for you again. It says again here, "You shall know today and feel it in your heart that God is the only power in the heavens above and upon the earth below. There is nothing beside him." The last words there of Devarim chapter 4, verse 39, in Hebrew it says, "Ein od melvado." There is nothing but him. I want you to really think deep about these words. Ein od melvado. There is nothing but him. May he be blessed. When you think deep about these words, it means there is no power on planet Earth or anywhere on earth above, below, or in the heavens above. There is no power but him. There is no power that can stand against him. There is nothing that can compete with God. And these words that we find in Devarim chapter 4, verse 39 are echoed through the Tanakh. God teaching them that he is absolutely one. I am reading this wonderful book called Knowing God's Plan by Ramchal, Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto. It's a very powerful book. And in this book, he touches on something very, very important. Rabbi Moshe Luzzatto touches on this verse definition of God's oneness. He talks about misunderstanding of the oneness of God leads to many people having a very false understanding of God's oneness, and that false definition of God's oneness or understanding leads to many people having false doctrines and false religions that are coming out of this misunderstanding of the oneness of God. And maybe before I can touch on what Ramchal is saying, Ramchal is Rabbi Moshe Luzzatto. In short, we call him Ramchal. Before I get to that, is the fact that if we look at what Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 39, meaning Devarim in Hebrew, it says, let me repeat again, "You shall know today and feel in your heart that God is the only power in the heavens above and upon the earth below. There is nothing beside him in od milvado." This verse suggests to us that we need to reach a satisfying understanding of the oneness of God. In all the attributes of God, this is the only attribute where we are commanded to apply our minds to understand this attribute of God. Any other attribute of God, we are not given that mandate of trying to understand. And also, it's beyond human understanding to grasp this perfect attributes of God that we are not even given an opportunity to explore. I can make an example. Compassion. God is compassionate. The kindness of God, all God knowing, and all these attributes of God. God has understanding, the wisdom of God. We know that he's wise, but we cannot fathom the depth of his wisdom. And for us to even sit and try to toil in understanding his wisdom, it's a waste of time. That will not lead to anything. We know that God's wisdom it's beyond any other thing. We are finite, he's infinite. So us trying to understand him is just beyond our ability. When it comes to the oneness of God, God himself made it possible for mankind to be able to understand this attribute. He even commands us to actually apply ourselves in reaching a satisfying understanding of His oneness. And then it says also, and feel it in your heart that God is the only power. Feel it in your heart. So you need to internalize this knowledge to a point where you have no doubt whatsoever when it comes to God oneness. So this is very, very important. So when we go, remember that is Devarim chapter 4, verse 39. If you go to Devarim chapter 4, verse 35, it says here, you have been shown with clear knowledge that God is the only power, there is nothing beside Him. With clear knowledge, we are required to apply our minds to understand the oneness of God. It's not something that we leave it to imagination or faith or anything. We need to apply ourselves. We need to toil in understanding the oneness of God. Because it's imperative, it's very important to understand the oneness of God in order for us to reach the perfection that He wants us to reach. One time we will just talk about the perfection that we need to reach here on earth. Why do we have good and evil in the world? All these things, they are hanging, all of them, on the oneness of God. If you understand the oneness of God, you will understand everything comes from God, whether good or evil. We'll touch on all these aspects. So Ramchal says here, therefore, when we say that God is one, it is not sufficient just to understand that only one God exists. Meaning that He is the only being that must absolutely exist and that He is the only creator. We also need to understand that there is no power or authority in the world except His. There is nothing that can oppose God. There is no other power whatsoever here on earth or in heaven above. There is nothing that can compete with God, that can challenge God, that can stand against God. There's no other power. We do not have many powers or two powers, the power of evil and the power of good. Everything is subservient to God. There's only one power and nothing. So Ramchal says, it is not enough to just understand that, just say, there's one God. You must understand that oneness of God suggests that there's no other power but Him, or but His power. So he says here, there is nothing that can oppose God's decrees and nothing that can prevent His will from being carried out. This means that God's power is unique and total. This is the message of the verse, Devarim 22:39, that says, now open your eyes and see that I am the only one. I cause death and bring life, and no one can escape from me. So we paraphrase that verse, but go and look at it. Deuteronomy chapter 32, verse 39 is a very powerful verse. There is nothing that can save you from the hands of God. Meaning there's no other power that can come and compete or oppose God. This is very critical, very important for us to understand. Without this understanding, leads to many doctrines that we find today, and even the religions that are based on the false understanding on the oneness of the Creator. May He be blessed. So now, remember I said, Ramchal points at 5 of these categories of misunderstanding of the oneness of God that leads to so many religions today, and also people having their own understanding of how God runs the world or how the world runs. So I'm just quickly going go through them, and then as time goes on, we'll discuss them one by one. And okay, we're going to start with the first one, but understand this. These categories are based on the misunderstanding that God controls the entire world and there is no other power beside him. You know, many people sometimes they say that, yeah, God is one and whatnot, but they don't really understand what they're saying. So let's go through these 5 categories and then we'll take it from there. The first category is a category of idol worshippers believe that God is elevated far beyond this lowly world and is not concerned with what goes on here. They thought that there is no other powers below him there are other powers below him that control what happens in our world. The stars and their constellations, their angelic forces and their legions. They therefore set up ways of worshipping them, built altars and offered sacrifices and fire offerings to them. They believed that this would channel certain powerful forces to their advantages. So this is the first category where they believe that God he's too elevated for him to even bother to engage in everything that is happening in this world. He's far there and we are below here, and he does not even bother to entertain what's happening here on earth. And then we have got the second category of idol worshipper claimed that God forbid that they are two competing powers, one that causes good and the other causes evil. They said that every extreme has its opposite. And since God is the ultimate good, there must be an opposing power, God forbid, which is the ultimate evil. They claimed that the good and the evil that we find in the world stems from these two forces. So you see, the second categories of this misunderstanding of God's oneness are the people that come and says, not everything comes from God. We've got two forces. We've got the force of good, of which is God, and the force of evil, of which is the opposing force. And therefore, there are two powers in the world, the good and the bad. And they're not coming from the same source. They are opposing each other. That goes against the oneness of God. And remember, the oneness of God says everything comes from God, both evil and good. We read in Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 39, that we need to have a pure understanding of the oneness of God. We are commanded on this oneness of God because the moment you miss it, you think there's other powers in the world that can compete with God. And I know you're already asking yourself, but the Satan, let me say you have been misinformed about Satan. And if you can give me time, we will have another video where we address this issue of Satan. But for now, come with me here and let me guide you through this and say to you, there is only one power in the whole world and in the heavens above, and that is God. And that power has no competition whatsoever. And so these people that come, this category that comes and say there are two forces. Remember the first category says, God is far there. He does not concern himself with what is happening down below here. There are forces that are in control, like the stars, the moon, and all these heavenly bodies, and also angelic powers that controls the world. And therefore they start, maybe if I bring it to African spirituality, where they talk about even the ancestors being there to influence what happens here on the world of the living. But they misunderstand that that's not the case. In Old Melvador, only him. He's the one who is in control of everything. Everything. The second category says there are two forces. There's the forces of good and the force of evil. And that already we have discussed now that that is not true. It goes against the oneness of God. Let's hear the third one. The third view is that of the ordinary masses of humanity. They believe that the universe is governed by absolute laws of nature that God built into the structure of the world. They claim that laziness is the enemy and that only a person's own efforts and diligence can bring him success. That those people that think hard work and doing whatever is the one that brought them where they are. And they distance God from the success that they have, all the things that are happening in their lives. They think they're in control by working so hard and doing all these things. They are the ones that bring success to their lives. It does not work that way, you know. Let's see what Ramchal says. He says, this is like the attitude of that is discussed in Deuteronomy. Go and read it. Deuteronomy chapter 8, verse 17. My own strength and personal effort brought me all this prosperity. Devarim chapter 8, verse 17. Deuteronomy chapter 8, verse 17 is what has been discussed in Deuteronomy to say, I'm warning you, don't think success comes from your hard work or whatever. Success and everything comes from Hashem. May He be blessed. Comes from God. And so the third categories are those who think their personal effort are the ones that brought their own success in life. Does not work that way. Ramchal continues, says here, they also believe that events are governed by blind fate. Therefore, there is no differentiation between what happens to one person and what happens to the other. Everything comes from impersonal natural laws and nothing else, for better or for worse. We don't want to find ourselves in that category as well. So let's go to category number 4. The fourth view is that of the certain nations of the world who believes that because of the Jewish people's sins, God will never save them. They call them despised silver. They claim that God chose the Jewish people and gave them the choice to be righteous or wicked. And since they chose to be wicked, they prevented God, as it were, from being able to help them anymore. And since it was no longer possible to save them, God was forced to abandon them and exchange them for other nations, God forbid. So this also is a very interesting topic that we will probably dedicate a video strictly for it, where there's, especially in Christianity, where people believe they are now, call themselves now the spiritual Israelites, or they have been crafted in, they are now Israelites as well. In Christianity, those who have read about this and those who actually notice this doctrine is very problematic. It's actually called replacement theology, where the nations of the world are claiming to be Israelites now. Can you imagine? You are a Sotho guy, tomorrow you wake up and say, I'm Zulu. The replacement theology, think about it, it's silly. And then we've got a fifth view that is of the Jews who purposefully sin against God. They recognize God's existence and intentionally rebelled against Him. One of these was King Ammon, who stated, I'm only committing this sin in order to anger my Creator. So this category, it's a very painful one, where the people of the book, some of them, when I say the people of the book, we're talking about the Jews. Within these people, there are those who will intentionally go against God. They don't understand that they're not in control of anything, nothing. You know, they will intentionally sin against God, intentionally so. So these are the 5 categories of the idol worshippers, of those, unfortunately, don't understand the oneness of God. And because of the misunderstanding of the oneness of God, they find themselves in believing in these false doctrines. Remember the doctrine of saying God is far above there. He does not concern himself with what is happening here on earth. The one that says there are 2 opposing forces in the world, the forces of good and the forces of evil, and they are not coming from the same source. And as I said, it goes against the oneness of God. For now, let me stop here, and then we'll have a subsequent video where we indulge deeper into the oneness of God, so we can have a proper understanding, so we can run away from finding ourselves in these categories that we have just discussed today. We know that today we've got people that talk about the Trinity, God is 3 in 1, coming up with theories and theologies that cannot be substantiated by the Tanakh or by the Torah. For now, let me just stop it here and say thank you very much for taking time to go through this video. Thank you.